While the party sleeps soundly in their camp, the last embers of their fire burning out, a grey hand rises from their bag of holding, and out crawls a nightmarish creature. Long, spindly limbs and a gaunt body, it hunches over the elf while she sleeps. Come the morning, there is no sign of your elven companion, and you will never see her again. The Bagman has her now. This image and the name of the Bagman have become infamous in the Dungeons & Dragons community as the epitome of that horror-themed monster. But who or what is the Bagman? And the question that any adventuring party is most likely to ask, how do we kill it? Let's find out. Ahoy everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nazir North and in this video we are looking at the Bagman, one of the most terrifying creatures described in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, even though it isn't technically an official monster. Well, not really anyway. But the Bagman isn't a fan-made monster like the False Hydra, and it's not created by third-party publishers like Kobold Press. It is mentioned in 5th edition D&D, just not in the way you'd expect. If you go looking for an official 5e stat block for the Bagman, you're going to waste your time. There is no mention of it in the monster manual and no stat block for it anywhere in 5th edition. It doesn't even have a page on the Forgotten Realms wiki. All we have officially on the Bagman from Wizards of the Coast for 5th edition is just a few short paragraphs on page 225 of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which is a sourcebook for 5e. And there are spread throughout the book 3 pieces of truly terrifying artwork that accompany it. In this video, we are going to go through what that book tells us about the Bagman and how, if you decide to run it as a monster, it may behave in combat by drawing up some homebrew stat blocks for it. I've got prepared not just 1 but 3 different versions of the Bagman that I want to run through with you, so you can pick which one you like the most or take any of the 3 and go and make your own changes to it so that it fits in your campaign. That is, after all, the spirit of homebrewing. Before we get started though, just a reminder, not everything in D&D needs a stat block. If you want the Bagman to be more of a ghost story and an unknowable or unfaceable threat in your game, you might review these stat blocks and think that you don't want to give yours a stat block at all. If, for example, in your game there is no hope of the players being able to actually defeat the Bagman, then keep it in the realm of roleplay and flavor descriptions. Sometimes giving something actual stats can make it less scary, so you may want to keep it as that intangible, distant threat. And even if you do run it with a stat block like a monster, you may want to start with a phase where it is first unknown and the players know very little about the Bagman leading up to that first combat with it. Okay, let's run through what Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft actually tells us about the Bagman. It's in a section in the book which is all about creating your own horror-themed monsters to fit the Ravenloft setting. And it talks about the Bagman just as an example of something a DM could come up with. It isn't describing an official 5e monster. It's really just walking us through that thought process of a DM inventing a new creature. But the example it gives us is actually really good, and the evidence for that is how it's caught on with the D&D community. The Bagman really captures the imagination, and it is a terrifying creature that's got a lot of potential. Before we get into mechanics, let's start with the lore given on this example monster. It's an urban legend about an adventurer who, when they were in danger, decided to abandon their friends and hide inside the group's bag of holding. The adventurer somehow got lost inside the bag and slipped through interdimensional space into other bags of holding. Over time, this poor soul was warped and twisted by the magic from this interdimensional space, and turned them from whatever humanoid race they were into the form that we now see in the artwork. The Bagman is then said to emerge from a random bag of holding every night, and if he doesn't find his home, he drags someone away with him, leaving some odd trinket or piece of junk behind that he's picked up in his travels across bag space. Bag space isn't an official term for it, by the way. That's just what I like to call the collective of various pocket planes that the bags of holding and similar objects create. when items in somebody's bag of holding go missing, or where items appear in your bag of holding that you didn't put there, these events are also often blamed on the Bagman. Some even claim that speaking too loudly over an open bag of holding or whispering into a magical storage space, "Follow my voice," 3 times, will make the Bagman come for you in the night. Okay, we've already got from that description some really useful information that will help us when we come to create the Homebrew stat blocks. We know that the Bagman's motivation is to get home, so it tries to emerge from a bag of holding presumably as often as it can, which seems to be once per day or once per night. Also they're suggesting that it prefers the dark. We know it can move between different bags of holding, presumably with some kind of plane shifting magic, but it may not have full control over this ability. And we know that the Bagman takes people and they don't come back. It's not stated explicitly, but I think we can safely assume that they are dead, either having been perhaps consumed by the Bagman or killed by the Bagman in a rage as it realizes the place it emerged from was not the home it was looking for. Although it's likely that by this point the Bagman may not even remember what its home looks like or where its home was. Alternatively, maybe the Bagman simply deposits its victims out of a different bag of holding, alive and relatively well. This version is a little less scary, so I'm not going to explore that option too much, but that could be an interesting take on the Bagman if you wanted to go down that route. And in place of the people that it abducts, it leaves a random trinket behind. So we know the Bagman does at least have some interest in items, objects, and sometimes takes and leaves things that it finds in its travels. Even though there is no stat block in the book, the entry does give us all of the information we need to build one ourselves. The entry starts off telling us to imagine a modified troll. Not necessarily using the lore and nature of the 5th edition troll, but just using the stat block as a jumping off point to customize a new and original creature. It presents the Bagman as an abductor who carries its targets off, so the entry suggests giving it the grappler trait from the Mimic, along with the amorphous trait from the Black Pudding, both of which can be found in the Monster Manual. It then also suggests adding a new trait called Alien Mind, which was introduced in the Ravenloft book earlier in this chapter. This trait essentially stuns creatures that try to read the Bagman's mind. So, bringing all of this information together and sticking to the word of the book as closely as we can, we get a stat block that looks like this. I've called this version Van Richten's Bagman, as we'll be creating 3 different variants in total, so we need some way to distinguish them from each other. As you can see, it's basically a troll that can squeeze through small spaces, can hit harder when it's grappling, and is a little resistant to mind-reading attempts. But let's be honest, if you see this thing crawl out of a bag and start dragging away one of your friends, your first response isn't going to be to cast Detect Thoughts. You're going to try and kill that thing. So I don't think Alien Mind really adds much in terms of combat benefit. It's just a bit of extra role-playing flavour. Plus, the DC on that trait is so low, it's only an 8, because the book says for Alien Mind the DC should be 10 plus the creature's intelligence modifier, and the base troll from the Monster Manual has a negative intelligence. So Alien Mind really is just a waste of text there in my opinion. It's never going to trigger, and even when it does, players are very likely to pass that save anyway. So if you want a Bagman stat block that is basically raw, rules as written for 5th edition, there you go, that is it. But personally, I think we can do a lot better than that. So let's take a stab at revising and improving this into our version 2. This is the revised stat block that I've simply named the Bagman, as I think this is much more true to the spirit of the Bagman as it's described in that urban legend in the book, and is much more of a viable foe, a dangerous creature for the party to face. If you're thinking of dropping the Bagman into your next game session, this is the one to use. Let's run through it. I've changed the creature type to Aberration. Giant just didn't make any sense here, it was just because it was copied over from the Troll as described in the book. As a former adventurer, we can assume that they were once a human or elf or other playable race that got warped and twisted by this interplanar, interdimensional travel, and Aberration just seems like the best fit for this type of monster. I've left its size as large, as that is what the artwork seems to imply as it's there leaning over that bed. And its large size makes its ability to squeeze and shrink all that more terrifying. I've also left the armor class, hit points and ability scores where they were, as I still want to stay in the same ballpark in regards to challenge rating. I've kept its proficiency in perception, but I've also given it proficiency in athletics for grappling and stealth for creeping around in the dark. And dark vision there of course makes sense, as we know it prefers to come out at night. Again, on languages, it doesn't really make sense for it to speak giant like a troll, so I've swapped that out for it being able to understand common but not being able to speak itself. I think this kind of creature is scarier if the players don't really have a way to properly communicate with it. And I think for flavour, I would maybe allow the Bagman to utter the odd phrase or two just to amp up that terror. Perhaps it whispers, "home," or "come with me," as it drags its victims away. But its mind is too far gone to express any ideas more complex than that. To give alien mind a bit more of an emphasis, I've given this version of the Bagman immunity to charm, and I've ignored the stun DC being based on the Bagman's intelligence, and instead set it as the average DC for a challenge rating 5 monster according to the Dungeon Master's Guide, and that is a DC of 15. The amorphous and grappler traits are fine, they fit the theme of the monster we are creating, but I've dropped Keen Smell, as that's just another hangover from copying the base troll stat block. Similarly with regeneration, I think it could work here, but this is fundamentally a keystone feature of the troll. To make it fit better for the Bagman, I've removed the clause about fire and acid damage and instead replaced this with either sunlight or magical light of 3rd level or higher in terms of what can disrupt the healing. And I've also added in the sunlight sensitivity trait that creatures like the Drow and the Dweogar have in 5th edition. That regeneration trait, as I've altered it, could actually make the Bagman really difficult to kill, and it allows you as the DM to have them potentially as a reoccurring threat throughout a campaign, rather than just a one-off fight. The Bagman will emerge at night, so sunlight is probably out of the question, and not all parties will have access to powerful enough magic that emits the light they need to block that regeneration. This means that when you run the Bagman and it's low on hit points, you can have it retreat back into the bag of holding. It can survive to fight another day, or night. And this all aligns nicely with it being a challenge rating 5 creature, as you're probably going to be throwing this version of the Bagman at the party when they're level 5 or above, meaning they will have access to 3rd level spells. A word of warning though if you do use this version of the Bagman: if the party don't have access to a sufficiently high level light spell, and you don't make the Bagman retreat, the Bagman will TPK them, it will wipe them out. Just be careful and make sure you know the capabilities of the party before you decide how the Bagman is going to behave in that encounter. Even if the CR is appropriate for the party's level, it's not always going to be fair to send them up against a creature they literally have no hope of defeating. It would be the same as sending a troll after a party that had no means of dealing fire or acid damage. The party just simply couldn't win. So just bear that in mind. One, I think, important thing missing from the Bagman's description in the Ravenloft book is exactly how it moves from one bag of holding to another, as each bag is meant to be its own isolated extra-dimensional space. The entry does, however, mention that the Bagman can emerge from any magical storage space, not just the bag of holding. So based on that, I think it's safe to assume that the Bagman could also use the handy haversack or the portable hole. So I've created a new trait to reflect this, lost in bag space. This gives us some mechanical rules to wrap around what the book only gives us as flavor text. Each time the Bagman leaves a bag of holding, handy haversack or portable hole, they emerge from a different one, at random. So adventurers and magic item vendors are those most likely to fall prey to the Bagman, which are probably the groups where the rumours and stories of the Bagman spread most prolifically. However, if you want the Bagman as a recurring threat, we may want the Bagman to be able to attack the party more than once. But we can't do this if that emergence is truly random. So I've allowed the Bagman to willingly emerge from a bag it's come out of once before. But we don't want the Bagman to attack the party every single night. That's going to get tedious real quick. So there is a recharge on this specific ability. The Bagman has 1d4 days of random bag hopping until it can again choose a specific bag to emerge from. I'll leave the details up to you in terms of how you want to build this into your adventure, as this will vary from campaign to campaign. But if the Bagman does choose to strike at the party more than once, make sure you know why it's doing that. What does the party have that the Bagman wants? Maybe it thinks they hold the key to it finally being able to go back home, wherever that home may be. And finally, on actions for version 2, I've given this one the auto grapple on a hit from a claw attack. This synergizes perfectly with the grappler trait. The escape DC for this grapple is 15, which not only aligns with the average DC for a CR5 monster, it also calculates perfectly with the Bagman's athletics proficiency, the DC being 8 plus 7 to get 15. You don't always have to align monster DCs with skills and abilities, but it's just nice to see it when they line up. So there we have it, the Bagman, adding some minor homebrewing to create something that is still incredibly close to the description given in the book. Even though I'm pretty pleased with that stat block, we aren't going to stop there. If you've seen some of my other videos on homebrewing where I've created custom monsters, then you already know where we're going next. We are going to build a final high challenge rating legendary Bagman variant that will scare even a 20th level party. Before we move on to that last stat block, this is just a reminder to hit that like button if you're enjoying the video so far, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this in the future, and a big thank you to those of you who already have. If there is anything specific you'd like to see on the channel in terms of videos on homebrewing, world building, or other advice for dungeon masters, let me know in the comments. This channel is still pretty new, and as I'm recording this, I'm nearly at 1,000 subscribers. So I would be really grateful if you can hit that subscribe button and help get me over the line. Alright, back to the video. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, the only official source we have on the Bagman, has a whole chapter dedicated to Dark Lords and the Domains of Dread. For our third and final incarnation of the Bagman, I'm reimagining him as a Dark Lord, master of his own realm within the mists of Ravenloft. Sure, he started out as a terrified adventurer, retreating like a coward and abandoning his friends to their doom. But now, after centuries or maybe even millennia of tormenting and abducting others in the night, his power has grown greater and greater. Not all of those he abducted were killed. Many people, along with other objects and items, were discarded. Abandoned and lost in Bagspace, a dark liminal realm, reminiscent of an interdimensional scrapyard, surrounded by mists within the Domains of Dread. Within this domain, the Bagman is as a god to the people he has dumped there, and many others, whether through magical teleportation mishaps or interplanar accidents, have also found themselves trapped in Bagspace at the Dark Lord's mercy. So long has Bagspace now been populated that some who live there know nothing outside of this terrifying realm of lost and forgotten things. For they are the children or even the grandchildren of those poor lost souls who first found themselves there. As I think more about Bagspace, I think it does have the potential to be fully fleshed out as a Domain of Dread, where you could run an entire D&D adventure. If that is something you'd like to see me do in the future as a bit of a world building exercise, let me know in the comments. But for now, let's move on to the third and final stat block itself. This is the ultimate form of the Bagman, known simply as the Dark Lord of Bagspace. Some of his features here are similar to what we had in the previous stat blocks. Some are ramped up to 11 to reflect his higher challenge rating and legendary status, and some of the abilities are new and unique to this version. Let's run through it. He is still a large aberration, although he now has a new trait called Unbound Form. This combines Amorphous with a new ability to change size at will. His AC, hit points and ability scores are all higher across the board to reflect its legendary status and new challenge rating. I've also decided to give it a climbing speed and the spider climb trait. Just picture waking up in the middle of the night and seeing the Bagman crawling upside down on the ceiling, reaching out its long arm to grab you. It's the stuff of nightmares, and it fits this monster really well thematically. It's then got proficiency in strength and dexterity saving throws, along with the same skill proficiencies we gave it before, athletics, perception and stealth. I've given it resistance to non-magical weapon damage, as I feel that long exposure to interdimensional spaces will have made it less affected by mundane physical harm. And it also has immunity now to the charmed and frightened conditions. I've extended its dark vision range and also given it a short range true sight. For languages, this version of the Bagman has been around for a long while and has visited a lot of places via random bags of holding, so I've allowed it to understand all languages but still can't speak. However, it does now have telepathy. For role-playing purposes, I would still keep its telepathic communication limited to simple words and phrases, really playing into that aspect of a broken and fractured mind. Speaking of mind, I've dropped the alien mind trait as a passive ability and instead replaced it with fractured mind as a legendary action, which we'll get to shortly. We still have grappler, and I've modified Lost in Bag Space to Lord of Bag Space, which allows the Bagman unrestricted teleportation between bag space and any magical storage space of his choice. Regeneration has also been improved with more hit points recovered per round and a higher level of light spell required to disrupt that healing. You'll need a light spell of 5th level or higher, so something like Sunbeam, Sunburst, or maybe even the Dawn spell from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. If a player asks, I'd also allow them to upcast something like Daylight, even though that's not normally a spell that can be upcast, but I think that would be fair as a situational ruling. I've also left in Sunlight Sensitivity as it is. I've then added in 2 new traits here, Legendary Resistance and Undying. Undying is one I've borrowed and altered from the Vecna dossier, which was a special Stranger Things tie-in released for free on D&D Beyond. This Bagman is basically a god, and this trait reflects that. If his physical body is killed, he reappears a few days later in a random bag of holding or potable hole somewhere in the multiverse. And once he's back, he's probably going to be pretty mad and head right for the people who killed him, or at least tried to kill him. But he doesn't have to be truly invincible. I'd like to think that his original bag of holding, the one he jumped into while his friends were dying, is still out there somewhere, in some dusty tomb or long buried crypt or dungeon, gathering dust beside the bones of his fallen party. Never found and never disturbed in all those years since that fateful day when he abandoned them. And if the adventuring party in your campaign can find that original bag, then maybe there's some way they can use that to either permanently destroy the Bagman, or otherwise free him from his cursed existence. Alright, moving on to actions. We've kept the grappling claw but upped the damage and the reach. Then I've also added some necrotic damage to the bite attack. In addition, the bite attack, a bit like a Beholder's Death Ray, will instantly kill a creature if they hit 0 hit points. No death saving throws, just death. It now also has a bonus action. The Bagman doesn't have any ranged attacks, and they wouldn't really fit its theme anyway, but it is good at grappling, and it's definitely got the strength to throw things. so why not use a grappled creature as a weapon? And that's pretty much what we have here with this bonus action. The Bagman can throw a creature that it's grappled into some other hazard, at a wall, or even into other creatures. This gives the Bagman a bit of versatility when it comes to fighting at range, and a potential option to deal with any flying foes. As the Bagman is Lord of Bag Space, where lost people and things end up, it only makes sense that certain magic misfires in the Bagman's presence. So, once around with its reaction, the Bagman can potentially redirect a spell somewhere else or return it back to sender. This is a pretty powerful effect, but it does use up the Bagman's reaction, so he's only going to be able to use that once around. For legendary actions, we have a basic bite attack, we have Shadow Step Teleport, borrowed from the Way of Shadow Monk, and then Fractured Mind. Fractured Mind is a psychic attack on one target that also has a chance to stun them. This flips the previous trait Alien Mind we had on its head, as instead of a creature trying to read the Bagman's mind, the Bagman instead forces its horrific memories into another creature's head, causing them that psychic pain. And if a party are foolish enough to fight the Bagman on its home turf within its domain of bag space, it's also going to get some lair actions which will up its challenge rating by another 1. The first lair action allows the Bagman to open up a portal to a random pocket dimension somewhere and rain debris down to damage and possibly pin other creatures in place. The second can be a lot of fun, and this just summons a bunch of random creatures from a random plane. They aren't aligned to the Bagman though, this just creates some extra chaos on the battlefield, and I think is a good thematic fit for this creature who at one point had no control over where it went in the multiverse, and now it can direct some of that chaos against its enemies. And for its third and final lair action, this is the thing that every DM who hands out 2 bags of holding to their party starts to fear. This action opens up a portal to the astral plane, sucking in nearby creatures. Very similar to that effect you get when you put 1 bag of holding inside another. This portal remains for 1 whole round of initiative and starts to drag nearby creatures in, who could, if they fail their saving throws, be deposited in some random location on the astral plane, potentially removing them from the fight entirely. And there we have it, 3 stat blocks for the Bagman for 5th edition D&D. If you want to use any of these for your own game, I'll add a link into the description where you can get hold of the stat blocks. I really hope you've all enjoyed this one. Building these stat blocks, particularly the Dark Lord of Bag Space, was a lot of fun. And please remember on your way out to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more D&D content, and let me know in the comments, will you use the Bagman in your game? And what monsters would you like to see featured on the channel next? The Bagman was actually a suggestion from a viewer on a previous video, user Joey18. So if you do have any favourite monsters you'd like to see on the channel, let me know. And for those of you who want to show some extra support for the channel and help me grow and produce more videos like this, check out that join button underneath the video where you can become a channel member to unlock these exclusive emojis and badges. That's all for this one. Cheers everyone, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.